It is my pleasure to welcome Brad Medairy, Executive Vice President and Cybersecurity Leader at Booz Allen Hamilton. Hey, Brad, nice to see you.
Hello, nice to see you, Suzanne. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Glad you're here. I was hoping we could dig in. Booz Allen's also a sponsor of the SIG, but also of the Cipher Brief Threat Conference. And I think when I last saw you, there's been so much debate around kind of what's going on globally. The world has been more complicated, or actually more dangerous in the past, never more complicated, I think is one way that General Hayden has put it over the years. And that's only proven to be more true lately. I thought you and I might talk a little bit about getting the private sector perspective on kind of navigating these cyber challenges in this great sort of rejuvenation era. So, how do you see this moment in time where we are now and some of the challenges we're facing?
Yeah, certainly cyber attacks and activities have continued to be on the rise. It's interesting. Um, I look at the investment in Silicon Valley, and I think probably it's probably declined significantly, but probably 18 months ago, there was $21 billion of annual investment in new cybersecurity technologies, and yet cybersecurity, cyber risks and breaches are increasing every year. And so, to your point, the world's a dangerous place. The threat continues to grow, and our adversaries are investing heavily in new capabilities. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about China and the pacing threat today, but
Yeah.
but certainly we've seen China accelerate in that space.
Yeah, let's talk about that because you pick your government agency. They are pretty much all in agreement on one thing now, which is that China is this pacing national security threat.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, and I mean, we've all grown up in a period and in a time where the United States was the unquestioned dominant global power. And as a nation, we wield tremendous influence from a military, economic, and cultural perspective. And we have built many allies and partners, and we fundamentally agree on the norms of the international system. And I think for the first time in many years, we're at a time where we're at heightened danger, heightened disorder, and China, Russia, they're seeking to establish a post-West global order, more conducive to their authoritarian regimes, and they're looking to expand their territory, as we've seen with Russia and the Ukraine, and really kind of elevate their position on the global stage. I'm a cybersecurity professional, and so we all know what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine in terms of kinetic war. But China is dedicating significant resources in the cyber domain, and they're using that today, to project power and increase their global stature. And obviously, why we're all here, we're all taking notice, including the U.S. government.
hmm I think it's really interesting because we often talk about the development of technology, how China's government system allows it to take full advantage of its technology. People often don't have a choice in the industries in which they go to work in under a communist regime. And so democracy can sometimes be a little bit of a hindrance. But I'm really interested, Brad, to hear how you think this looks from China's perspective.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When you look at the SecDef and their national defense strategy, they talk about China as the pacing challenge. DNI talks about the cyber threats posed to the critical infrastructure sector. We have seen China really evolve their tradecraft over the years. One of the best publications I've seen came out of CISA, that talks about China's ability and some of their new TTPs around living off the land techniques. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at that publication, it's sort of like reading the Born Identity. It's exciting, and this is coming from a techie, obviously, but it's certainly their tradecraft allows them to, in a very sophisticated way, embed themselves in networks and prepare for future attacks. We've seen things like Volt Typhoon, that was uncovered by Microsoft. That was a campaign active since 2021, And we saw them targeting critical infrastructure, communications, manufacturing, utilities, government. And it really hit me when it was uncovered in Guam in terms of the impact that they're capable of in terms of critical infrastructure. Now, today most of the activity has all been around espionage, but it certainly could be used, from a destructive perspective. And from a Chinese perspective, they're really the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the diplomatic, economic, military, and technology power to do so. Um, you asked the question, what does it look like from China's perspective? Um, you know, what's interesting when you look at it from China's perspective, they're playing the long game, and we're in the United States. Mark was just talking about emerging policies on the Hill and executive orders. We tend to measure progress in terms of 2 and 4 year political cycles. China is really looking at this over really the span of 100 years, and they have a strategy around the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and it involves the pursuit of political, social, military modernization, to expand their national power and frankly, revise the national international order. From their perspective, they're using a lot of different techniques in that from a they're obviously heavily invested in technology. They look at technology as a strategic differentiator. AI is kind of the buzzword du jour these days, but when you look at China's investment in AI, it's second only in the world to the United States, both in terms of scale, sophistication, and investment. I was kind of as I was preparing this, we produce a report where we look at the investments and the capabilities that China's making. I think over the last 5 years, 475 billion in venture investment in Chinese AI startups. And their private investment's been 82 billion, and that's only second to the United States, but heavily invested in AI and emerging technology, and pushing that into their military capability. And to a great extent, they have a green field, and they can accelerate adoption and embrace these new AI technologies. Now, they're still heavily dependent upon us as a nation, in terms of advanced chips and for critical AI applications. But that really leads into the second point I wanted to make in terms of from China's perspective, heavily invested in from an economic perspective in terms of IP theft, and we've all seen this. I've done a lot of work in the pharmaceutical space. I do a lot of work with the government. We've obviously seen a lot of activity there, but I think the tech sector is really vulnerable. And it was interesting. I popped in at the tail end of Mark's conversation talking about the cloud service providers becoming critical infrastructure. 100%. Same with chip manufacturers. At the Reagan National Defense Forum this weekend, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, she was talking about restricting the export of chips that will help enable and accelerate Chinese AI applications. And that's got sort of the U.S. tech sector up in arms, right? And I appreciate it. She said something around, hey, some of the CEOs of these companies made them a little cranky when the government's taking a really hard position on these exports. But the reality is, I really appreciate what she said. Hey, such is life. Protecting our national security matters more than short-term revenue. And I think that's the mentality that we're all going to have to embrace.
Yeah, I think that's something that Sue Gordon was referring to earlier when we were talking about sort of the risks and rewards of AI, as well as just these private sector companies really understanding almost a responsibility that comes with understanding the value of U.S. national security and the ability
Yeah.
to do business the way we've always done it. Let me just ask you, from espionage to intellectual property theft, which has been a problem regarding China for decades now, and Congress has been trying to figure out if it has a role in trying to fix that. I'm curious, what can industry do to help?
Yeah, just a couple things. I mentioned the CISA guidance on living off the land. I think that the cyber game continues to evolve. I mentioned the investment, $20 plus billion, breaches continue to happen. It's because adversaries are investing, equally as much. Sometimes it's easier to play offense than defense, and I think it's really important that we really understand the adversary TTPs and modernize our cyber defenses appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the technology field continues to evolve. I think that we need to, we talk a lot about imposing cost on adversaries. And when you look at it from a military perspective, I think we need to shift how we think about imposing cost. I think we need to think about imposing cost in terms of advanced cyber defense. And I think one of the areas that offers really great promise is around zero trust.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of attacks still originate through phishing, through identity. Zero trust, I think, offers us great promise in terms of modernizing our infrastructure, to prevent some of these more sophisticated attacks.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the other thing, I think from an industry perspective, two final points. One is Director Easterly talks a lot about secure by design, and I love the expression. I talk to my kids about this when they procrastinate. And I'm like, hey, when's the best time to plant a tree? And they always look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, well, the best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. The next best time is right now. And so from a secure by design perspective, we've got to start immediately thinking about new capabilities and baking security in. But I think as a community, the other thing that we need to really wrestle with is that we have a tremendous amount of technical debt across our ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our systems are powered by COBOL. You go into a manufacturing facility and it looks like the Smithsonian of IT. You see operating systems dating back to the 90s. And so I really think that we need to get a good grasp around what we have in terms of tech debt and really put a strategy in place to prioritize and start to buy that down. The last thing I'll say, Suzanne, is, and I think this also goes to how China views our nation. When we tend to talk about defending the cyber domain, we say, okay, well, here's what the government's doing. Here's what the critical infrastructure is doing. Here's what the Department of Defense is doing. And we look at these as in silos. From an adversary perspective, China is looking at our nation as one attack surface or one battle space. And I really think that we need to change our perspective and look at how we defend the nation. I really appreciate a lot of the initiatives that CIS has put in place around JCDC, some of their other initiatives that are trying to bring this community together around hyper collaboration. We're not going to be able to address this problem alone. We've got to come together and address it as a whole. And so, I think that our nation continues to make a lot of strides. I think that, we really need to understand the threat. We need to look at, emerging tech like zero trust. We really need to buy down tech debt, and we really need to kind of come together as one battle space to defend the nation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points. It's so reasonable. Brad Medairy, Executive Vice President of Cybersecurity Leader at Booz Allen Hamilton. Thanks for joining us with that today, Brad. It's nice to see you again.
Great. Well, Suzanne, thank you. And I hope everyone has a good day.